Spanish and German are two very different languages. One is a Germanic language, the other a Romance language. But Spain was once full of Germanic tribes for hundreds of years. So shouldn't Spanish and German look just a little bit alike? Yet somehow Germanic influence is almost undetectable in Spanish. And if you want to know why, well, keep watching. Here is a clue. Does this look German to you?
Warum der Park Tiergarten heißt, Nadine.
Das frage ich mich auch schon die ganze Zeit.
Y nosotros, después de estar un buen rato montando en bicicleta, veníamos aquí porque de una de estas ramas...
German and Spanish. What do you think? Not much going on here that sounds the same to my ears. Am I right? But let's be sure. If we take it way back into the most ancient of ancient times, German and Spanish have a common ancestor, something they named Proto-Indo-European. But if you want to go back to the early Bronze Age, well, you're going to be by yourself, because the two language families only really began to take shape around the time of the Roman Empire. Spanish and German have a fair amount of grammar features in common. For example, both have gender, plural forms, relative pronouns, verb conjugations, and tenses. But even these similarities don't play out in the same way. For example, both have a subjunctive, but Spanish is totally different in the way it's used. German has case for all nouns, not just pronouns and so on. Both languages use the Latin alphabet, although a little differently. Spanish has 5 short vowels, a, e, I, o, u. German has a lot more. There are a few similar sounds. For example, the Spanish jota, je, ji, is almost like the kind of hard h sound in German. Perhaps because they were speaking vulgar Latin with a German or Germanic accent. I don't know. We are not at that part yet. At first glance, it might seem like we have a good argument here. The Spanish pistola comes from the German Pistole, and Bunker comes from the German Bunker. You can probably come up with a few words yourself, but they are mostly going to be modern borrowings. So don't be fooled by words like norte, este, sur, oeste, north, south, east, west, because they only showed up in the late 15th century. Now, as you're going to see, although Spanish has some Germanic words in it, this doesn't mean that they are German words. Take these Spanish words with Germanic roots, for example. They most likely reached Spanish via French, not directly from Germanic languages. Remember, France got the Frankish invasions, and those tribes were West Germanic, right? The whole story is in this video here, if you're curious. Bottom line is this. The vocabularies of the two languages really don't have much in common, except where words have been borrowed. We're getting to the good stuff, but first, don't you want to hit subscribe and like the video and turn on notifications? It will keep me making videos like this. Now, if you remember your European history, and I'm sure you do, Germanic tribes took over virtually all of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. There were many of these tribes, and they spoke many different Germanic languages and dialects. The more they spread around Europe, the more the dialects changed. And then eventually there were clear divisions between Northern, Eastern, and Western Germanic languages. Anyway, as it goes, they left their mark on the cultures and languages of the people they conquered. That is, everywhere except the Iberian Peninsula, and especially not Spain. There were Germanic tribes there, all right, but who were they exactly? Spanish is one of the languages that evolved from Vulgar Latin after the fall of the empire. You know that part. 75% of Spanish words have Latin roots, including many loanwords from other Romance languages like French, Occitan, Catalan, Portuguese, and Italian. It also has influences from Arabic and some ancient languages like Iberian, Celtiberian, and Basque. But German? Okay, if you just think about the French influence that I just mentioned, remember that France was once a Frankish kingdom, and so French has a good helping of Germanic language already in it, specifically West Germanic language. And those Frankish tribes certainly had a go at Spain somewhere around the year 260 AD. One group of Franks managed to force their way in as far as Tarragona. They plagued the region for about a decade before the Romans got rid of them. But as you're going to see, a decade means very little in the grand scheme of things.
Some might be surprised to know that long before this, over 1,000 years ago, Germans, or rather Germanic tribes, were plundering and raiding their way across the entire continent of Europe and even parts of Asia and Africa, ruling over an unprecedented expanse of land for the time.
German formed out of various languages and dialects of Germanic tribes, and that's where most Germanic words come from. It also got a fair amount of Latin and Greek loanwords, and later it grabbed a bit of French and modern English. But the Latin influence in modern German mostly got there in a roundabout way. The direct influence of Latin is really quite small, and German doesn't sound similar to Latin, either in tone or the general flow of the language. The real history of the German language only began around the time of the Germanic migration near 600 AD. There was a major change happening called the Second Germanic Sound Shift. That's what it was. Basically, the way people pronounced words was changing. Now, I should mention that way back in 750 BC, there had already been a first sound shift in the ancestral language. So by now, we're already talking about some pretty evolved dialects. Anyway, one group of Western Germanic languages split off, and this group is what became Old High German. People continued speaking German this way until the Middle Ages, where Middle German emerged, and so it continued until Modern German. In other words, German came specifically from the West Germanic languages.
Hörthata kunne täken suket. Amen kuitha iswis, jave give do kunya thamma tekna.
In the 5th century, formidable German tribes invaded Spain, the Visigoths. Now, the language they spoke was Gothic, although they called it something that you will just have to read, and these Visigoths controlled Spain all the way up to the 8th century. They had a king, and he created the Visigothic kingdom of Toledo. Actually, they'd already done some ruling in Gaul, which later became France, but those fierce Frankish tribes got rid of them in an epic battle. No one knows for sure where they originated from, but at this point the Goths had already made a lot of mischief, and that's an essential part of our story about why Spanish and German did not get too cozy. Here's a massive clue. Visigoths were part of the East Germanic tribes. Now, do you see where I'm going with this?
A me I Visigoti, e da domani ce lo scriviamo. Vietato l'ingresso ai ragni e ai Visigoti. Oh, e mi hanno rotto le scatole questi Visigoti e basta.
The Visigoths left virtually no trace of their language in modern Spanish. Weird, right? You're going to see why, but here is a fun Gothic line you can try out on the weekend. Okay, so now we have some Germanic Gothic speakers ruling Spain. Keep up, keep up. If you haven't figured it out yet, Gothic was a different language to the language that came before German. Now, we could end the video right now, but aren't you wondering why Spanish didn't at least get indoctrinated by Gothic then, and therefore still end up sounding a little bit German, a bit Germanic? Put simply, the Visigoth invaders of Spain were already Romanized, and they were bilingual. They'd been living alongside Romans in Italy for years before they invaded Spain, and they already spoke Latin. Most Visigoth leaders had previously been Roman generals, like these two guys, kings of the Visigoth kingdom of Hispania. Of course, they left Rome because they decided to destroy it. The famous sacking of Rome, you've probably heard of it. After all of that almighty looting, they took off to France and then finally to the Iberian Peninsula. So in the end, what do we have? Well, we have Visigoth invaders who are basically Roman legions whose ethnic and cultural origin is East Germanic, not West Germanic. And it seems they preferred Latin to Gothic. Even the first Visigothic law was written in Latin, so Gothic never reached the status of written language in Spain. In fact, while they were bossing Hispania about, they converted to the local religion, a power move. Of course, I mean, how else do you get votes? But this meant Gothic stopped being a church language too, and to top it all off, they got rid of legal distinctions between Romani and Gothi, and so now basically everyone was called Hispanic. What about the ordinary, everyday people? What about them? You know, those guys? People like you and me back in the day? Didn't they say, hey, cool language, let's all learn Gothic? Well, I don't really think they got the chance. The Visigoths, you see, were conquerors, not unifiers. They became the nobles around the place, and they didn't exactly move around the country much, just casually speaking Gothic. Meanwhile, the everyday people who worked the land remained the same Latin-speaking population. And all this was about the time when Vulgar Latin started becoming the Romance languages that we know today. It's all falling into place now, wouldn't you say? In the end, the little that Spanish got from Gothic was a few words, mostly military. There are a few other Germanic words in Spanish that aren't Gothic, but could be from a different Germanic source. Spanish also got some minor grammar features from Gothic, like this noun declension and surname suffixes like as, es, is, os that mean son of. But in the end, because hardly anyone bothered speaking it, Gothic language was basically disappearing by the mid-century. But that's not the last reason why Spanish had no time to pick up Germanic. Little did they know Something much worse, something much badder, to use some proper grammar, was coming to town.
3. Blusa. So similar.
That was cool.
Pants. 1, 2, 3.
Pantalones. How do you say it?
Pantalon.
Pantalon. That's cool. Pantalones.
In 711 AD, or 711 AD as I like to call it, just 300 years after settling in Spain, Arabic-speaking invaders hit hard and took control from the Visigoths. They conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula, and like the Visigoths, the Arabs became the elite. But the Arabs would stick around a good 700 years and leave a really strong mark on modern Spanish. But that is a tale for another video. In fact, this one right here, so don't you dare miss it.